Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Luna had been convicted of a crime she did not commit, a botched heist orchestrated by someone she had trusted. The specifics were a flurry of betrayal. Marcus, her ex-boyfriend, had framed her by planting evidence linking her to a convenience store heist. The trial was brief, the evidence damning, and her public defender, busy and unprepared, was unable to dispute the prosecution's case. Luna's pleas for innocence were drowned out by the gavel's final strike. Now, she was simply another number in a system that didn't bother to look twice. But today was different. Today there was Will. Will had been her companion since childhood, the only constant in a turbulent life. He was the youngster who shared his lunch when her mother forgot to pack one, the adolescent who assisted her in studying for math examinations she was certain she would fail, and the man who had sent her letters every week since she had been imprisoned. His letters were lifelines, full of stories about the outside world, sunsets over the lake they used to visit, and his dog Max, who waited for her at the yard's edge. Will's remarks reminded her of who she was before the bars, before the guilt she didn't have to carry. He had also seen her on a regular basis, sitting opposite from her in the prison's visiting chamber, separated only by a scratched plastic barrier. His brown eyes were usually steady, and his voice was serene yet determined. "We're going to get you out, Luna," he'd say, and she'd nod, wanting to trust him but aware of the odds. Appeals were expensive, and evidence of her innocence was limited. Marcus had vanished, leaving no trace, no confession. But Will didn't give up. He spent his evenings researching legal precedents, calling lawyers, and chasing leads that seemed to go nowhere. Until now. The plan had been quietly put together, with hushed chats during his visits and mysterious messages slipped into his letters. Will had discovered something, a security camera from a gas station across the street from the robbery, which the cops had overlooked. The footage was shaky, but it showed Marcus, not Luna, entering the business that night. It wasn't enough to overturn her conviction altogether, especially without the expense of hiring a lawyer to fight the case, but it gave Will an idea. A risky and reckless idea. "Luna," he said during his last visit, leaning against the divider, his voice barely heard above the hum of the prison's fluorescent lights. "I can get you out. Not through the courts. Not legally. But out." She glanced at him, her heart racing. "Will, you cannot." "If you get caught, I won't," he replied, his mouth hard. "I have a plan. Trust me." Trusting Will was the simplest thing she'd ever done. But the weight of what he was proposing, breaking her out of prison, felt like a stone in her chest. If they failed, he'd be jailed and his life, like hers, would be ruined. She wanted to say no, to tell him to continue fighting the legal way, but the prospect of another year in this cell, another decade, made her throat tighten. Luna had nodded, her eyes tearful, and said, "Okay." Now, as the jail clock approached midnight, she waited. The guards had completed their rounds an hour earlier, their boots echoing down the corridor. The other detainees were quiet, with some snoring and others lost in their own private misery. Luna's hands trembled as she put on the dark jumper Will had given in a care package weeks earlier. It was loose, ideal for concealing the little tools he'd smuggled in over the months, a tiny screwdriver, a folded piece of wire, and a scrap of paper with a map of the prison's blind spots. The plan was simple, yet terrifying. Will knew a former guard who had been sacked for transporting contraband. The man, disgruntled and broke, had provided Will the blueprint of the prison's security system for a fee. The East Wing had a rarely used maintenance tunnel beneath it. Its entrance was in the washroom, which was open during the night shift when just one guard monitored the area. Will had examined the schedules, camera angles, and timing of the guards' rounds. He'd located a 7-minute opening when the cameras were down for a system reboot, which happens every third Thursday. Tonight was that night. Luna's pulse quickened when she heard the faint clink of metal outside her cell. The latch clicked, and the door cracked open just enough for her to fit inside. Will stood in the shadows, clad in black, his expression wan but determined. He did not talk, only indicated for her to follow. She moved silently, her bare feet chilly on the hard floor. The corridor was dim, with flickering lights as they moved toward the washing room. The prison was a maze of barred doors and watchful eyes, but Will knew every turn. He had spent months planning, giving up sleep and savings to make this happen. Luna followed him, her breath short, her head shouting that this was insane. But there was no going back now. They arrived at the laundry room, where Will knelt by a grate in the floor, working swiftly with a screwdriver. With a faint sigh, the grate gave way, and he motioned for her to get down. The tunnel was tiny, damp, and smelled like mold. Luna's fingertips scraped against the hard walls as she crawled, with Will close behind. Her pulse thundered in her ears, every sound exaggerated, in the confined enclosure. She remembered her mother, who had stopped coming after the first year, too ashamed of her daughter's conviction. She reflected on the life she'd lost, her hopes of owning a small bakery, marrying a good person, and building a home. She pictured Will putting everything on the line for her. They emerged from a storage shed outside the jail walls, where Will had concealed a change of clothes and a beat-up automobile. The night air was fresh and crisp, with the promise of freedom, but Luna couldn't shake the fear that clung to her like a second skin. They hopped into the car, and Will drove with his hands firmly on the wheel. The road stretched dark and long before them, the prison's lights disappearing in the rear-view mirror. "Where do we go?" Luna whispered, her voice hoarse. "Somewhere safe," Will explained. "I have a friend in the next state. He has a place for us to hide till we figure out what the next step is." Luna wasn't sure what that meant. Will's footage might be useful, but it was no certainty. She was a fugitive now, and her life was permanently changed. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her harder than the prison bars had ever done. She focused on Will, his profile crisp in the faint light of the dashboard. He had sacrificed so much for her, including his safety and future. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at her, his eyes sweet but furious. "Because you don't fit in there. I know who you are, Luna. And I'm not going to let you rot for something you didn't do." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she averted her gaze to the black fields passing by. The world felt too huge and too unknown. She hoped they'd be able to clear her identity and start afresh. But the road ahead was as harsh as the one behind, and the weight of her decisions, Will's decisions, sank deep into her bones. They drove in quiet, with only the buzz of the motor to be heard. Luna reached for Will's hand and squeezed it tightly. Whatever happened next, they were in it together. And, for the first time in years, she sensed a glimmer of something she had thought lost forever. Hope. But hope was a precious thing, and those who ventured to steal it back were met with harsh consequences. The days that followed were a whirl of little towns, low-cost motels, and continual surveillance. Will's acquaintance, a gruff man named Tom, resided in a hut deep in the woods, away from prying eyes. He didn't ask any questions. He simply handed them the keys and warned them to stay out of sight. The cottage was basic but safe, with a wood stove, a sagging couch, and a radio that crackled with static. Luna and Will spent days studying over the blurry tape, attempting to assemble a case strong enough to present to a lawyer. They knew time was against them. The cops would be looking, and Marcus, wherever he was, may learn of her escape. Luna fought with her guilt. Every time she glanced at Will, she could see the life he had left behind. He'd been a mechanic, skilled with his hands, with a regular career and a little apartment full of books and plants. He was now a fugitive's accomplice, with the same unclear destiny as her. She tried to thank him, but the words were inadequate. "I'll pay you back," she'd say, and he'd shake his head, his smile worn but genuine. "You don't owe me anything," he would respond. "Just stay alive." That's enough. Nights were the most difficult. Luna would lie awake, listening to the wind through the trees, her thoughts racing with what-if scenarios. What if they got caught? What if the footage isn't enough? What if Marcus discovered them first? She'd curl into a ball, knees drawn to her breast, and attempt to recall the child she was before the arrest, the one who laughed effortlessly and dreamed without fear. Will noted her silences and frantic pacing. One night, as they sat by the fire, He handed her a mug of tea and sat next to her. "Talk to me," he murmured softly. "What's happening in there?" She looked into the fire, flames flickering in her eyes. "I don't know who I am anymore," she acknowledged. "I used to believe I was strong and could handle anything. But this has broken me, Will. And now I've pulled you into it." "You didn't drag me anywhere," he firmly stated. "I picked this. I chose you." His words hung in the air, laden with significance that neither of them dared to unpack. Luna longed to lean into him and let his warmth anchor her, but she kept her distance for fear of losing him, of ruining him. She sipped her tea, its bitterness reflecting her thoughts. The next morning, Tom stormed into the cabin, his expression gloomy. "You've got trouble," he replied, putting a newspaper onto the table. Luna's face looked back at her from the main page, a blurry photograph with the title "Fugitive Escapes Local Prison." Her stomach fell. The article detailed a manhunt, roadblocks, and a reward for information that led to her arrest. Will's name was not spoken, but it was just a matter of time. "We need to move," Will replied, immediately gathering their belongings. Luna nodded, her body moving automatically. They thanked Tom, who waved them away with a stern, "Don't get caught." The automobile was waiting in the woods, hidden under a tarp. They went north, toward a city where they could fit in, and where Will knew another person who could aid. The city was a tangle of noise and light, in stark contrast to the peacefulness of the cottage. They chose a cheap motel, paid with cash, and left the curtains drawn. Sarah, Will's lawyer, was dubious but intrigued by the footage. She agreed to look into it, but warned them that building a case would take some time. "Stay low," she urged, "and don't do anything stupid." However, remaining low proved to be more difficult than expected. Luna felt eyes everywhere, on the street, in the diner where they had coffee, and in the flicker of a TV screen that showed her face. She bleached her hair blonde, wore sunglasses, and kept her head down, but the paranoia persisted. Will was her anchor, and his steady presence was all that kept her together. Luna burst into tears one night while they sat in their motel room, the TV playing a news article about her escape. "I can't do this," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I can't continue running." "Will, perhaps I should turn myself in? At the very least, you'd be safe." He held her shoulders, firm yet compassionate. "Don't you dare," he warned. "Luna, we're close. Sarah is working on the appeal. We only need a bit more time." "Time," she repeated, her voice lifeless. "What if we don't have it?" He didn't respond, instead pulling her into an embrace. She allowed herself to fall into him, her tears soaking his shirt. For a time, the world was just the two of them, bracing themselves against the storm. The following day, Sarah called. The tape had been validated, and she had located a judge who was eager to hear the case. It wasn't a certainty, but it was an opportunity. Luna had a glimmer of hope, but it was tempered by the reality of their predicament. They were still fugitives, being pursued. Marcus was still present in her nightmares, like a shadow. The hearing was scheduled for a week later. Luna and Will spent the days preparing, discussing every detail with Sarah. Luna was unable to fall asleep the night before the hearing. She sat on the motel balcony and gazed at the city lights. Will joined her, providing a calm comfort. "Have you ever regretted it?" she asked. "Can you help me?" He shook his head. "Not for a second." She gazed at him, her heart aching with appreciation and something deeper, which she couldn't quite put into words. "If this doesn't work," she continued, "if they send me back." "It'll work," he responded fiercely. "It has to." The hearing was blurry. Luna sat in the courtroom, her hands shackled, her heart beating as Sarah showed the footage. The judge, a severe woman with silver hair, viewed the tape silently. Luna's lawyer fought strongly, citing flaws in the original case and a lack of physical evidence linking Luna to the crime. The prosecution fought back, citing her flight as evidence of guilt, but Sarah persisted. When the judge finally spoke, Luna held her breath. Based on the new evidence presented, the judge stated, "I am ordering a retrial. Ms. Torres will stay in detention pending the upcoming procedures, but her escape charge will be reconsidered in light of this evidence." It wasn't freedom quite yet, but it was a step. Luna looked to Will, who was sitting in the rear of the courtroom, his eyes bright with relief. She wanted to run to him and thank him, but the bailiff had already led her away. The retrial lasted months, and each day was a test of Luna's endurance. Will paid visits as often as he could, and his letters continued to arrive on time. The new trial was different. Sarah was prepared, and the evidence was stronger. When the verdict was delivered, Luna felt the earth tilt. Not guilty. She stepped out of the courthouse as a free lady, the light warming her face. Will waited, his smile brighter than she'd ever seen. They hugged without saying anything, the weight of the last 3 years sliding away. However, independence was not without its consequences. Luna fought to repair, tormented by lost time and damaged trust. She and Will remained close, their friendship solid but complicated by the repercussions of their choices. They relocated to a little town far from the city, where Luna built a bakery, her dream finally coming true. Will worked alongside her, his hands steady as he repaired the ovens, and his laughter filled the shop. Some evenings, Luna awoke in a cold sweat, thinking of prison and betrayal. But Will was there, reminding her that she was not alone. They never spoke about love explicitly, but it was evident in the way he looked at her and the way she grabbed for his hand. The world had attempted to break Luna, but she stood firm. And, with Will by her side, she began to believe in second chances. Will Spencer watched the verdict from his penthouse, jaw clenched, unable to believe what he was witnessing. He had once loved Luna in the way that only a man can when he believes he has lost everything else. Their affair had been kept hidden behind the glossy walls of Forrester Creations, whispered in the nooks of design studios, and sneaked between picture sessions and boardroom mayhem. He had pledged to protect her. He had failed. 3 years later, Will stepped through the prison's huge steel doors, a visitor pass attached to his fitted jacket. His reflection in the glass seems cooler than he recalls. He was no longer the boy who wrote poetry on napkins for her. He was harsher, sharper now, the son of Bill Spencer, bearing the Spencer name like a crown and a curse. When Luna entered the visiting room, she appeared smaller and thinner, with dimmed eyes but yet carrying the same fire that had previously consumed him. She paused before sitting, her hands quivering slightly as she lifted the phone from her side of the glass. "Will," she replied gently, her voice full of incredulity. "Why are you here?" He took a deep breath and pressed his palm against the glass. "Because I can't let you stay here anymore." She glanced at him, her eyes filled with perplexity and terror. "Don't," she replied. "Do not give me hope. It hurts too much." "I am not here to give you hope," he whispered, moving in. "I'm here to help you get out." Her breath caught. "That is impossible. You can't." "Luna," he said gently. "I've got you." The words shattered something within her. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she shook her head. "You're not sure what you're saying. I am a convicted felon. My life is over." "Not if I can help it," he said. "I know the truth now. About that night. About who actually drove the car." Her lips parted in surprise. "Do you know?" He nodded. "It was Thomas." She closed her eyes, pain washing across her face. She had tried to protect him. Thomas Forrester, her mentor, the guy who had swore she was like his daughter. But that night, when he'd been drinking, the headlights had blurred and the road had spun, she'd accepted responsibility to save him from losing everything. "How did you find out?" she asked. Will hesitated and then lowered his voice. "Hope told me." She discovered Thomas's previous dashcam film before he deleted it. He assumed he had erased everything, but there was a backup on his old design tablet. "She's gone now, left town because she couldn't bear the guilt, but she wanted you to know." Luna's hands shook fiercely, nearly dropping the phone. "He let me rot here for what he did. He's been covering it up for years," Will snarled, his eyes blazing with rage. "And now he's set to become co-CEO of Forrester Creations. He's going to reveal it tomorrow." She felt something black rise within her, not fury, but sadness. It felt like drowning. "So, why come now?" she whispered. "Why not years ago?" He swallowed hard. Because I didn't believe you, he replied. I wanted to. I really wanted to. But I was weak. And by the time I realized I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, you'd already left. The silence between them was heavy and agonizing.